Okay, a very good morning and welcome to the 15th meeting of the Criminal Justice Committee in 2025. We have no apologies this morning and Katie Clark is joining us online. So our first item of business this morning is to consider whether to take items 4 and 5 on review of evidence and consideration of a draft report in private. Are we all agreed? Thank you very much. So our main item of business today is an evidence session on the challenges facing businesses and vulnerable individuals in Scotland arising from the threat of cybercrime. The focus of this session will not be covering elements of child exploitation. Rather, our focus today will be on businesses and individuals at risk of being targeted by cyber criminals. Now, as we're all aware, cybercrime is becoming more prevalent and more sophisticated each year, and its victims range across our society, from vulnerable individuals to small, medium and large-scale businesses, as well as bodies in the public and voluntary sectors. So the aim of this session today is to help inform parliamentary debate on this issue by hearing from those at the coalface of responding to cybercrime. So I hope that we will gain insights into the methods and impacts of cybercrime, what we might be likely to face in the coming years, and what more Parliament and Government can do to help keep Scotland safe from this threat. So I'm very pleased to welcome our witnesses today. So we have Adam Stahura, Associate Director of Policy, Communications and External Affairs at Age Scotland, David Keenan, Chief Information Officer at Arnold Clark, Jude McCorry, Chief Executive of the Cyber and Fraud Centre Scotland. We have Nicola Taylor, a Partnership Member of the Cyber Scotland Partnership, Miles Bonfield, Deputy Director of the UK National Crime Agency, Chris Uliott, Head of Cybersecurity at the NatWest Bank, and Assistant Chief Constable Stuart Houston of the Organised Crime and Counter-Terrorism Intelligence Division of Police Scotland. So a very warm welcome to you all, and I refer members to papers 1 and 2, and I thank all organisations who provided us with written evidence in advance of today's session. So I intend to allow up to 2 hours for this session. So I wonder if I can begin by asking a general opening question just to get us started. And I think just for ease, I will come initially to Jude McCorry, and then I'll come to Miles Bonfield, and then I'll bring in ACC Stuart Houston, just to set the scene, if I may. So cybercrime is a vast topic. We all probably know someone who has been targeted, or who may work in an organisation that has been targeted. So I wonder if I can ask what you think are the most significant risks facing individuals, for example, the elderly or vulnerable people, and in the context of businesses, again, what are the most significant risks being faced today, and where might cybercrime and how might cybercrime develop in the coming years? So it's quite an open question, and I'll come straight to Jude McCorry.
So the first question is around older people. Yeah, I think this is probably the one that pulls at all of our heartstrings across cybersecurity and fraud, where we see the most vulnerable in society being targeted by individuals and usually serious and organised criminals that are doing it. What we've seen in the last probably 2 years, is that some of these are not criminals in Scotland that are targeting our older people. They are criminals from outside and inside the rest of the UK as well. The biggest ones, scams that we've seen, are around gold investment fraud, and also romance fraud as well, where people, they feel sometimes people are lonely, and myself and Adam were talking about this as well, and the older people, that they feel they've got somebody to speak to, or there's somebody taking interest in their finances and helping them as well. We are trying our best, I think, collectively to reach out to as many people in the older generation, but it is quite difficult in the world of social media and stuff. We have to look at how do we get out directly to these individuals and also reach out to families and friends and neighbours. And there are a lot of older people that don't even have, and we've seen that during COVID, where there's no human interaction with older people. There's a lot of work to be done, and these criminals, there's no point in us thinking that they're not going to go near older people. They are unscrupulous. They will target anybody, and older people seem to be very susceptible and vulnerable for this. For cybersecurity for businesses, I think this meeting was called before we've had the big hacks that happened, so it is very timely, but I think most of our papers haven't included anything on Marks and Spencer's and Co-op. Or also we've had 2 councils affected in the last 2 weeks as well, West Lothian Council and Edinburgh Council. And one thing I'd like to stop and for us to thank the West Lothian and Edinburgh Council organisations as well, especially I'm a parent of a child in West Lothian Council, and she's very disappointed that the exams went ahead, but I'm not, and neither is any other parent. So well done to the team out there. And I think anyone judging organisations that have had cyber attacks, you're very easy to judge them, but when you see the work and the effort that's gone into the councils and how well they've kept it all together over the last few weeks has been admirable. So well done on that. What we've seen from the larger companies like Marks and Spencer's and Co-op was that people immediately look at the data element. And yesterday, Marks and Spencer's have announced that some customer data has been affected. We don't know whose, we don't know what, but we know it's not financial data. And everybody then is up in uproar over data. I'm not saying data exfiltration is not harmful, but it happens every single day. And we're only hearing about this because Marks and Spencer's and Co-op are large organisations, and they do have an impact on us as individuals in Scotland. So we also need to think about destruction and damage to organisations and not just the data element. And I repeat, data exfiltration is very damaging, but look at the impact of cybersecurity attacks in Scotland from the UK. So we've had islanders without food, we've had Co-op stores empty. So there's people, and we're coming to high season for tourism as well in Scotland. So there's going to be another issue when people start visiting the islands and there's nothing in the stores. So we have to look at that human impact of cybersecurity. In one way, if we're looking for a positive from these attacks in the last few weeks, is that everybody, not just us as a team and people working in cybersecurity, take cybersecurity very seriously. This has an impact on everybody in society, and hopefully people will start taking cybersecurity and that personal resilience more seriously as well.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So I'm just going to come straight across to Miles Bonfield just to pick up the same question.
Thank you, Convener. So I'll give the perspective from the threat vectors, if you like, from an international and national perspective. So this is captured in the National Strategic Assessment of Serious Organised Crime that the NCA issues every year, just recently issued in March 25, I believe. Online connectivity underpins a wide variety of offending, including cybercrime, fraud, and enables almost all SOC criminality in some form. And SOC offenders are increasingly exploiting advances in technology to access victims. And I'm using particular language from the analytical product, but I think it's very clear that the online nature of our lives mean that offenders extraterritorially can access communities in Scotland very easily, and that is a threat vector that we need to recognise and respect. Ransomware conducted for financial gain remains the foremost serious organised crime cyber threat to the whole of the UK, including Scotland. What we mean by ransomware is that we've seen in the public discourse just recently a piece of malicious software that's placed on a system which either excludes the operator of that system and or extracts and exfiltrates data. And the motivation of that is financial gain by the criminals. it's almost certain that the threat from cyber criminals based in the UK, and including based in Scotland, and other English-speaking countries, such as the USA, has increased relative to 2023. So the infrastructure that we use to enable our lives, the fact that we have a commonality in the use of that technology, and the fact that we have this a commonality of language, both in our social interactions, but also in technology, is an enabler of wealth and business, but it is also an opportunity that is exploited by unscrupulous and immoral criminals for their illicit gain. So as the National Crime Agency, as our function as given by Parliament, is to provide that national strategic assessment, and also to lead and support the fight against serious organised crime for the United Kingdom in partnership with others. So in this space, it's really important that we have a strong relationship with Police Services Scotland, and indeed we do. And I can talk a little bit more about how that manifests itself in the response further as you wish, Convener.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I'll bring in ECC Houston from Police Scotland just to maybe cover off some of the enforcement side of the role of Police Scotland.
Yeah, good morning, Convener, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come along and speak about this. I think we've heard from colleagues about that sort of change in perspective of what is cyber crime, and I think there's that useful to have that sort of difference between cyber-enabled crime, which is that 95% of fraud is now committed online, so that's a cyber-enabled aspect of it. And then there's the cyber-dependent part, which is those where it's attacking with malware and various aspects of it, and making that real effort to attack and exfiltrate data. I think that's the sort of very, very changing picture, and we've all probably, at various times, probably this week, had a text message on your phone from a well-known parcel company saying that they've missed your delivery. Again, that's very much that cyber-enabled fraud aspect of how that does it. Those things, I think, are really important for us, is about how we follow the 4P mechanism about pursue, prevent, prepare and protect people for this. And I think we've heard various parts of that in what my colleagues have said. The pursue part, answering your question about the sort of criminal justice outcomes, is about quite often these are borderless crimes, and the fact is that is perpetrated from out with the UK on occasions. We have had cases within Scotland where we have people involved in particularly denial of service attacks where they've been orchestrated by individuals within Scotland. As recently as last year, we saw someone convicted of that. We also have that opportunity where this is a network of people quite often that are involved in some of the larger ransomware attacks, that if you look at organised crime groups in the past where they would operate in networks knowing each other, quite often now I think we need to be alive to the fact that people are operating in networks that actually have only seen someone through a screen, which is a different way that how we approach how we do it. And I think that's important to us about our pursue methodology in relation to this. So quite often the action we are taking is look to gather what is the threat intelligence that's there, that what are the weaknesses in systems, whether it is that text message that we're getting this week, is that a sort of theme that we can then push out a prevention message on the back of that and make sure that those vulnerable people are not being taken in by anything that's happening or being exploited in any way. But there's also the fact is for us is about businesses, and I know we've touched on about some of the impact that can have on business. And although we're there to try and investigate that and get an outcome for that, there's quite often a big part of that is making sure how can we help them recover and get back onto again and become part of their business once again.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's a really helpful sort of scene setting, if you like. And of course, we do have two representatives with us this morning, Mr Keenan and Chris Ulliott, who have been at the sharp end of cyber crime. So before I open up to members, I wonder if I can maybe just bring you both in just to maybe talk about maybe not necessarily the detail of what happened, but I'm very interested in the impact of your respective organisations being targeted and what that impact was. And then I'll bring in our first member, I'll bring in Rona Mackay after that. So I'll maybe come to Chris first of all, and then David.
Yes, thank you. I think being a big bank in the UK, we are clearly targeted all the time, and maybe some of the facts and data that we see can help put a sense of scale to this. So as a bank, we analyse every single email that enters our estate, and we process it looking for malicious content. And about a third of the emails, and that's millions a month, we actually block because they are believed to be the start of an attack against our staff. And if I look outside our network and the attacks that are probing our estate, we're averaging about 100 million attacks per month, just trying to break past the defences that we have in the organisation. And the result of that is we have to make a huge ongoing investment. And I'm very fortunate as a bank, I have resources to my, that I can use to defend against that. But it's hundreds of people, it's millions of pounds per year defending the bank and our customers' money. But I'm very alive to the fact that when I look to my customers and to other organisations across Scotland, they are not able to make that scale of investment. So you can see kind of the scale of the problem we're trying to handle and how we as a bank manage that. And then you kind of ask yourself, how is everybody else able to do that? And particularly when you start to look at individuals and some of the victims that we've talked about already. We're seeing advanced use of artificial intelligence to create fake documents that look very realistic. We see advances in fraud where fraudsters from overseas are using artificial intelligence to change their appearance in real time. So they can do a video call with a victim in the UK and appear to be maybe an elderly British gent talking to an elderly lady, but the reality is the person behind that isn't. It could be a youngster or somebody else elsewhere in the world. So the advances in technology are really enabling what were traditional crimes, but in very new and very convincing ways. And that presents a set of problems that we are essentially in a continuous arm race trying to protect the bank and our customers.
Thank you for that. Fascinating, eye-watering numbers that you're quoting there. I'll come straight to David and then I'll open up to members. David.
Good morning and thank you for the opportunity to come here as a witness to the committee today. Arnold Clark were the victim of a serious cyber attack in December of 2022. Similar to Jude, not to downplay the idea of the theft of data, which does occur in many of these incidents, but ultimately the real impact for the public is in the loss of services. So similarly, what Jude was talking about with the co-op and the empty shelves in remote areas of the country. Immediately post-attack, with our inability to be able to operate our systems for a period of time. In the days immediately after, we had over 4,000 customers expecting to come and make use of our services. So over 700 people who had bought a car and were expecting to be able to come and take delivery of that vehicle. 2,000 people who either had their car in for a service or were booked in to have their car serviced and weren't able to have that work done. And over 1,500 people making use of our rental business, many of them holidaymakers travelling from abroad, expecting to arrive at Glasgow or Edinburgh Airport and come to our local rental branch to collect a car that they had booked for rental. All of these customers we were unable to service, and that's the direct customer impact. As a business, we were without our systems for several days immediately post-incident, and back to about 30% capacity relatively quickly. But the recovery from the attack was a multi-month effort across a significant IT team. At the time of the incident, we had well over 200 staff in IT, a multi-million-pound budget, 12 staff dedicated to cybersecurity, and it still wasn't enough to be able to protect us. Ultimately, you've heard the kind of numbers that Chris is dealing with. We are not quite at that scale, but seeing very similar things. And ultimately, a cyber criminal only has to be lucky once. We have to be lucky against every single one of these attacks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure members will be really keen to come back and explore the kind of real impact, the human impact, if you like, of this. Okay, so I'm going to open up and bring in Rona Mackay and then Liam Kerr. Rona.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, panel. My question is really for ACC Houston, but first of all, I'm just going to come to Chris and say absolutely staggering number. Would you mind repeating that number?
Yeah, so on the boundary of our technology estate, we block about 100 million attacks every single month.
100 million every month?
Yeah, and we do that through, again, very fortunate as a bank, I have a dedicated intelligence team that talks to our peers, talks to law enforcement, talks to other industries, and we exchange information on known criminal gangs, people who are mounting these attacks, and then we put in place blocks to try and prevent them getting anywhere near our estate.
You've had to expand your workforce to deal with all of that?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow, amazing. Thank you. ACC Houston, I was wanting to ask yourself and Miles Bonfield about data of recorded incidents of cybercrime and just sort of how accurate it is. And again, I mean, pretty staggered to see the increase in the Police Scotland figures and the Scottish Government data, which is similar. In 2020, Police Scotland, this is an estimate of 7,710, and in 2024 it was 18,280. Similar sort of estimated data for Scottish Government. So I'm trying to get a feel of, this is estimated, and I suppose by the nature of the crime, it's hard to say how accurate ever that could be. Can I have your take on whether that's an underestimation or over?
I think like any crimes of this nature, the underreporting is massive, and the fact is that people that maybe don't want to come forward for a number of reasons, and maybe those sort of vulnerable or exploited persons, there's a bit of embarrassment there. There's a bit of I've been taken in by something, so I think that's a big factor that by some of the, and I think some of the recent incidents we've seen with the big businesses who are coming out and saying, we've been a victim here, I think is quite a positive thing, and the fact is it may encourage others to come forward. We do need to know, and I spoke a wee bit about that opening part about obtaining that threat intelligence picture. So the more people that tell us about the modus operandi or the tactics or the way that people are playing this out, that helps us build a better understanding of the threat picture across the globe, in essence, because this is that fact is of what's happening here today could be happening elsewhere in Europe or even further afield the next day. Huge part of that for us is having that international collaboration that we have, and we have quite a lot of great link in through the National Crime Agency, but also into some of our Five Eye law enforcement partners, particularly the FBI, who are do a lot of work in relation to online cyber attacks, whether it be fraud or ransomware. So that's to get back to your question, though, I do think that is an underreported part where we're always going to have until we have that opportunity for people to to say how do we deal with this. But I think the other part for me is they might not report it to the police, but if they report it to some of our partners, it's essential, for example, the banks that Chris touched on, is for them to share that with us. Now, we may not want, the individual may not want to speak to the police, but we then have a better understanding of what the threat picture is, and that's as more important than anything.
Are you confident that the public know that you are taking this seriously? I mean, I'm thinking about if somebody says, well, I don't want, the police won't do anything about that. Do you know what I mean? So how are you sort of getting that over to the public that they are taking it seriously? So
I think that's always been a bit of a work in progress in relation to how do you get out that cyber harm part. Now, from April this year, Police Scotland have created a cyber and fraud unit, which sits under my command as part of Specialist Crime Division, in that we have a dedicated unit who will deal with this. We are working towards where we have going into a report fraud system, which is operated by the City of London Police, which will cover all UK reported fraud and cyber incidents. I think that's about an opportunity for us to make sure we push that message about. There is an avenue to report this and make sure. And I think my own personal message is, we may not get to the point where we have someone in that criminal justice process, but by you telling us, we can help others not falling foul of the same thing, and making sure we get that message across.
Yeah. And again, it must be creating an awful lot more work for you as a force to have to deal with it.
Absolutely, and I think that's the important part. We're looking at what are the opportunities that we can keep pace with technology, but also what's the opportunity for us that we can collaborate with partners who can support us in doing that, and that's about that coordination, because we're all doing the same effort. We just need to bring it into the same place.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Miles, can I have your view, please, on the recorded data and accuracy, etc.?
Sure, I agree with ACC Houston. It's almost certainly an underreporting, and from the perspective we've got, I would say that there is that element of shame for the victim that will be a hurdle to get over to report. And there is the consideration from a business perspective of how that they may damage their public image. So I think it is almost certainly a lower figure. It's really important, as ACC Houston said, that we get over that and encourage as much reporting as possible. Not only because we get that shared awareness and common purpose around how the threat's evolving, but also it's a first touch opportunity with the victim to provide them with prevent advice so that they don't get re-victimised in the same sort of way. And so I think moving into action fraud, where that opportunity, another opportunity to give prevent advice, is a really good thing. Take public confidence communications very seriously in order to get that message out to reach the public that we have a competent and an important response. So that's a key part of the overall system response, as much as the pursuing offenders. Yeah.
Thank you. And just finally, is there any element that you know of as like false reporting, and how easy is that to detect? Somebody just want attention or whatever, phoning up to say that they've been a victim. I mean, is that easy for you to detect? And does it happen? Do you ever get sort of hoax calls or anything?
I'm not aware of instances of false reporting. We have a triage system that we run to support the system partners, where those initial reports are triaged and assessed and progressed through to the appropriate pursue response or prevent activity or advice to the offenders. And I'm not aware that through that triage system that we've had false reporting.
I have thought it's the sort of thing people, but you never know.
No, indeed.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Convener.
Okay, I think Nicola Taylor, would you like to come in? No, that's
Sorry,
fine.
it was just to kind of add to one of Stuart's points around that kind of collaborative working and touch on the fact about Cyber Scotland partnership, and that's exactly what that has been designed to do. So it was established in 2021, and I think the number of reportings that have come in since then, they've almost doubled since 2000. I think that's testament to the fact that that message is getting out there to the public by way of the partnership that works. So there's kind of 21 organisations that sit on there just now, all who have access into different networks. And the Cyber Scotland Partnership website itself does signpost to the great work that Police Scotland are doing, and Cyber and Fraud Centre as well, and the resources that are available to the public.
I have to say it's an impressive system that you've set up pretty quickly, I think, to collaborate with each other. So, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Liam Kerr, then Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. ACC Houston, do you think that traditional policing and traditional policing bodies are able to effectively police the digital space? Or do you think that the police and perhaps justice agencies need to be structured, resourced and perhaps even trained differently to accommodate the new environment?
I think the fact it is such a changing pace and things move all the time, what I really touched on about law enforcement don't always have the answers to some of this. So some of the work that we do along with the financial sector, for example, where if money's being moved in the back of cyber, whether it be cryptocurrency, which we see a huge increase in, or whether it be other aspects that probably isn't, as you said, probably a traditional policing or what we would face, a threat that we would face. It's about linking into some of our partners. Now, we have really good relationships with the National Cyber Security Centre, other intelligence organisations that can assist us as how we target that. So I think it is a different approach, and I don't think all times the criminal justice outcome is maybe the best answer. Sometimes that disruption or prevention aspect is more appropriate to try and make sure that we stop this happening again. The fact that it's borderless is another part that I think we can't lose sight of about how we are equipped to be able to do that. We are fortunate in Police Scotland, and the fact is we have officers still embedded within Interpol and Europol, and the fact is we have that opportunity to collaborate internationally really quickly, and that has happened with some of the cases we've had where we've had joint operations with the FBI, with people in Scotland and in America in relation to particular cyber crimes, including SIM swapping and various aspects of that. There is probably, I think, a bit for us to learn about where we can go from academia more. We have a really, really strong position in Scotland, and I was fortunate enough when Friday just passed, I went to the Cyber Quarter on Dundee, along with Mr Day, the Minister for Further Education, was there as well, where we saw a showcase of students who are coming to their final year of cyber courses and ethical hacking courses, and they showcased some of the work that they've done in relation to managing large amounts of data, assessing data for threat, risk and harm, and I must say that's where we probably need to take some of our ideas of how we tackle something and reach in. Now, Police Scotland have signed a partnership with the Cyber Quarter at Abertay about we sort of link in and liaise with them about how we can advance our own thinking. And I do think going forward it's not the traditional bit that you spoke about, but it's how else do we tackle this. And we don't have all the ideas, but people in business, academia, they have the ideas of how we can make this a bit better to detect.
Very grateful. And I should say, anyone else, just try and catch my eye if you want to come in on any of these questions. Just a subsidiary question to you, ACC Houston. Do you have any view on whether the legal framework is appropriate or requires looking at again, or the sorts of crimes that are on the statute book need to be reconsidered in light of the developing situation?
It's a very good point, actually, and I think the Computer Misuse Act we're still working to is from 1990, which I keep getting told was a long time ago. It doesn't feel it, but it was, even before I joined the police. However, there is sort of changes. I know the online protection bill that's been going through has got some, the online safety bill has got some parts that will help this. I think, interestingly, I think there's some other parts that we could do about how we look internationally in relation to the fact that a lot of this takes elsewhere. How do we look at blocking, taking down some of the platforms that cause the harm? I think that looks a wider, and I don't think that's one country can legislate for that. I think that's that wider aspect, a bit more strategic look at it. I do think there also is a bit about what we do in relation to how we treat those that are convicted of some of these cyber crimes. Is we look at serious crime prevention orders and how we deal with those as a sort of deterrent for people that may have been involved in this activity. Some of that maybe would develop in the fact is it limits people about how much access they can have and how they can share it, or they have to allow that to be viewed by monitoring officers. I think that's maybe something that could be re-looked at about how we do with encrypted communications, which is another part of this, how we could look at maybe strengthening that ability for those that have maybe been through the system, because this is a real, you know, it is a moving feast, and the fact is the technology changes virtually on a monthly basis. How do we keep pace with that as well? Thank you.
Yes, Jude McCorry.
I've raised it in my paper as well around the sharing of stolen data. What we've seen and what we are very worried about when there are large-scale attacks like Dumfries and Galloway for the NHS, that how do you protect patient data, but also customer data as well. So this data then, if they're not paid, if the gangs are not paid the ransom, they do dump the data. What we're trying to do is look at the laws aren't there to protect us as our data, as you know, our health data or our customer data. So that data then is a free for all for anybody to download. They can share it. If we went out and we handle stolen physical goods, we would be committing a crime, but you can share data and you can sell the data from the dark web. So, and that what that also leads to is the victim is the company who's had the cyber attack, and then maybe 6 months, a year later, there's another victim because they now have solicitors basically chasing their customers, saying you could have a case against this organisation because they've leaked their data. And again, I caveat, it's not good that your data is out there, but there's this other industry going, and it's thriving off this stolen data that is not a criminal act to steal. So I think we need to look at things like this as well. And also, if there was, so for Dumfries and Galloway, if we had these discussions as well at the time, how do we take out a class, like an injunction against the sharing of the data? And the HSE in Ireland were the same as well. They did take out an injunction of the sharing of any data that could have been dumped for any patients in Ireland, and that was a whole healthcare system. You can only have the injunction in the country that you take out the injunction, so that doesn't then stop others from other countries then sharing that data as well. We haven't seen evidence of the data being shared. We have seen crimes that could be attributable to the data. So I think we need to look at that. And I know it's not a Scottish law. I know it's something we should be looking from a UK perspective. It would be good if we had that adult conversation now about how we do this and how we protect organisations from this data just re-emerging all the time and being rehashed everywhere.
That's really helpful. I'll stick with you, Jude McCorry, if you don't mind, because you mentioned your submission there, and your submission also says that you reckon more needs to be invested in proactive areas, as you put it, to prevent cybercrime and around innovation. For the committee's benefit, would you mind elaborating on that, and specifically what we as politicians need to be thinking about to meet that aim?
So I'm an ex-employee of the Data Lab, so we had Data Fest, and we've got people from Data Fest here as well. 5 years down the line, I went to Data Fest. From the first one happened 5 years ago. Or no, 5 years ago I was CEO, but 10 years ago we had Data Fest. And I'm still hearing the same conversations about AI, everything's great and all this kind of stuff, but I never hear a conversation about how we can use AI for good around cybersecurity, how we can join up data science and cybersecurity as well. So I think as a nation, we're very good at pushing forward as a data for excellence, Edinburgh is the cyber excellence for data, city for data. But we're not talking about how we're protecting that data. We're building on data every single day, and we're innovating around data science, on artificial intelligence, all that kind of thing, but we're not talking about how we're protecting it. So I'd like to see more of a conversation around that. I'd like to see around law enforcement. There's a big thing around, that programme, Computer Says No, that we can't share data. We don't need to share data. As Stuart spoke about, we should be sharing intelligence. We should be open, and the people that we have here, I'm very proud that we do share that intelligence and we do help make Scotland safer. But there's a lot of other organisations that could help us do that. We also rely on a lot of organisations outside Scotland for that innovation as well. I think we need to start taking a lead on that ourselves, because we've seen budgets been slashed in the US, that we've seen intelligence agencies been slashed as well, like CISA as well. So we can't rely on others for our innovation and for the protection of our own organisations as well. We spoke about the students in Abertay, so we have really the brightest brains in this country coming out around ethical hacking. They're the good people in cyber, so I do shorten it, call them hackers. Sometimes people get very afraid that I've got hackers working for me. Brilliant people, brilliant university, but what I'd like to see is organisations open up to work in different ways with these pupils, these students, that we shouldn't, and I know Police Scotland are looking at this, they shouldn't have to do 2 years on the beat. A lot of these companies, or a lot of these individuals would shy away from having to go out and meet people, but they could start straight away in Police Scotland in different roles doing data science and cybersecurity as well, and look at that emergence. Going back to when you're saying about changing the laws or changing the workforce in police, should everybody be skilled up in fraud and cyber? I think what Police Scotland do very well is they're able, the people on the streets and the people meeting these people who have had crimes committed against them. Police Scotland, you're never going to be able to educate everybody in cyber and fraud. But what they're very good at is signposting and making sure that the victims of these crimes get the support that they need. And I think that's the bit that we need to get out into the public, report as many crimes as possible as well, because they will be there to support you. And the ethical hackers and young people as well understand cybersecurity and fraud a lot better than us, and are very, very good at victim support as well.
David Keenan.
Thank you. Just to pick up on a couple of points that Jude was making there. So one around investment. these cyber criminals are becoming increasingly advanced, and therefore the tools and techniques and technologies that are required for businesses to be able to combat these attacks is growing in complexity as well, and with that there's a growth in cost. That must have a massive impact on the Scottish and UK economy. All businesses having to purchase these tools and pay for these tools in order to prevent these attacks. Most of these tools are built and sold by international companies, so it's money leaving the Scottish economy. So, more investment and innovation within the UK and within Scotland would be very, very useful. And in terms of, you asked ACC Houston about changes to approach. As the victims of a cybercrime back in December 2022, we did the responsible thing. We reported the crime to the police. We reported the crime to the ICO. That immediately makes us the subject of an investigation by the regulator. But what was missing was an organisation for support. We were a victim of a crime, and we had little or no support, except from organisations like Jude's. So, in terms of changing our approach, support for businesses who are victims of these crimes.
That's fascinating. Thank you. If there's no one else who wants to come in on that, I'll hand back to convener.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Adam Stahura, because you've been listening patiently to what we've been discussing, and just on, I suppose, on that point about support in the aftermath of a crime. Just from your perspective, very interested to bring you in on that, and maybe hear from your sort of perspective, your organisation's perspective, how the importance of that.
Thanks. This has been fascinating. So I've been listening, not just patiently, but with great interest. The human element of all this is incredibly important. I think we're touching this with regard to NatWest as well, but customers that might be impacted, and people have been impacted maybe by Arnold Clark instance as well. I guess every single serious organisation in the country will have cybercrime on their risk register, won't they? And it's going to happen, as opposed to let's hope it doesn't happen. So I'm sure there's a lot of good investment in this and a lot of good thinking. We have been undertaking research for the last few years, probably since 2021, about older people's attitudes to scamming and fraud initially, and then moving more into cyber crime as it became more prevalent. Our last piece of research on this was in 2023, and there was changes from 2021 to 2023 in terms of the type of things that people encountered. But through being targeted through email and text message was the most common, and there'll be a lot more now, as we touched on, with regard to developments in AI, that people will not be able to understand that these things are not real, that they'll look very, very convincing. And even if you consider a lot of older people who might have sensory impairment, maybe it's sight loss or hearing loss and other things, so where there might be glitches in systems, it'll be passive for them. So things can look very, very convincing indeed. The last time we undertook any kind of research on this, about 20% of people who had been victim of a crime, sort of fraud-related, didn't report it. They didn't think they knew where to go to report it. They didn't think it would be taken seriously. They didn't think that anything could be done. Now, either 20% is a lot of people or not very much. I'm not sure. But I guess then we'll want to see in the future how people become more confident in reporting what's happened to them. There might not be a particularly good and easy resolution, because a lot of this is about people losing money. And I think it's been touched on in the past by panellists with regard to people's own confidence and not wanting to tell anyone that these things have happened. It's quite hard as well, we've found, to work out the kind of degree of financial loss. In this, maybe it's with regard to how stats are collated and reported. Sorry, ACC, I'm not necessarily looking at you from a Scotland point of view, but having that information is quite helpful to understand the scale of the problem out there. And we know there's a lot of underreporting too, but what this really does for people can create financial destitution. That absolute kind of hit to confidence and self-worth for an individual, which has other detrimental impacts on their health and well-being, mistrust in others and in companies, and interacting even with institutions in the state. We found out that for people who are not particularly confident online, now just as a couple of statistics on this, we've got of older people, about 3/4 are online, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are particularly comfortable or skilled navigating the internet. You can be plugged in, but not necessarily able. And so a quarter of those people who are online are just really not comfortable or safe operating online. So there creates a whole load of people. If you're looking at over 65s, what's that going to be? 250,000 people in Scotland who will be online but really unsafe. So there's a pool of people who are in a really potentially difficult spot. And being victim of this can really draw people into their own isolation as well, that they'll move away. So some of the information that we did have was about if we are, so it's about how we, adopt digital technology throughout Scotland, but if the only way that older people can interact with the state or with services is digitally, and they've been victim or subject to kind of digital related kind of incidents, there is a mistrust of that. Is this thing legitimate? Who am I seeing? And I think we've got to be very careful. Members of the committee might have heard me say this repeatedly in different places over the last however many years about how our public services need to be open to people, how we can actually speak to real people, see people, get kind of support. And I think there's two elements in this which are incredibly important for older people, but anyone, because we're going to hopefully become older, and some of those issues might come with them, but how we are able to prevent this in the first place and protect people from it actually happening. So how do we get, as a nation, people who are online better digital skills, that have access to, programmes and systems on their devices that keep them safe, that can block malicious attacks, can stop them from even seeing it in the first place. I think that would really, really help too.
Yes, thank you for that. A lot in there. Okay, I'll bring in Pauline McNeill and then.
Thank you very much. So I've got a couple of questions. One just on the issue of ransomware, and then secondly on the evidence that ACC Stuart Houston has provided to the committee around exploitation, physical harm and so on. I'm interested to know, don't know, maybe it's Miles for you, but you can decide. The recent attacks on MNS that you'd refer to, the interesting thing is that, David Keenan's outlining quite rightly the investment that's needed in companies, but it was a simple breach in the case of M&S, as reported, that somebody phoned up the IT help desk, as we all are used to doing, and that was a simple way in, and they found that they could
know that.
Right.
It's not confirmed. It will be still subject to a criminal investigation. So I think we need to be very careful on how we don't trivialise this kind of thing. It is a criminal matter, and we just.
Well, I'm not trivialising it. I'm just saying that there's reports already saying that that's what this thing happened. Okay.
I would wait until any evidence, or if they want to share.
Are you sceptical about that?
I'm sceptical of what I read in the papers every day, so I don't.
Fair enough.
We deal with facts, so yes, I would wait, and we don't know the full facts.
Okay, well, let's see what the full facts are. Yeah. What I wanted to know was, is the ransomware, which I understand, so organisations like Scattered Spider, I presume that, that's what's out there as well. Who are these people? Do we know much about who they are? Are they highly trained individuals? What's attracting them to crime? It just seems that maybe quite important to get behind that.
I know if you've got a point, I can maybe come in first of all. Yeah.
So I'll answer that question first. So Scattered Spider is the group for which the current attribution is being laid. Whether it is them or not, we need to wait for the outcome of a proper investigation. But when we look at the people behind these crimes, they are very varied in backgrounds. So they range, if you look at some of the attacks that have happened in the past, it's been individual youngsters who've just got bored at the weekend, all the way through to loose collective of individuals who maybe frequent the same online forums. So you may find some of these groups, and the group that we call Scattered Spider consists of youngsters, we believe, late teens, early 20s, from multiple countries who happen to collaborate and exchange ideas on an online forum. And so there's a loose collaboration there. all the way through to some very organised criminal gangs who will build huge dedicated infrastructure, have large amounts of funds available to build the support infrastructure needed to mount these attacks. When you take a step back from the people that we're talking about, though, I think it's really useful to look that behind these crimes there is a huge ecosystem. So it's not always one group of people. So you will find there will be a group of people who write the software and they will sell that software online. And then a different group of people will take that software to mount the initial attack. And then they might gain an access to a corporate network or to an individual's computer, but they might not do anything. They will then sell that access to another group of people, and that group of people may then do the extortion or commit the crime that's very visible. And then there's the problem around how do you launder the money. And there's different groups of people who specialise in taking cryptocurrency, anonymising the source and the destination, and then providing services to turn that into hard cash afterwards. So through the entire chain of attack, it's very rare that there's just one group of people or one person. It is an entire ecosystem. So when we talk about disrupting this, there's many places that you can look to see how you disrupt this crime, but it's international. The group that write the software, they may be in one part of the world. The people who did the attack may be in another part of the world. And that's part of the problem we have with this, is the scale is huge, the number of people involved is huge, and it is an entire black market and ecosystem that we're all trying to track and understand and interrupt as they do these attacks.
That's really helpful to get that understanding. In your view, Chris, if the proper investment that's been talked about and warnings and police resource, how easily do you think we could shut down the scope for ransomware incidents?
I think it's a really big and hard problem. Mm-hmm. I look at the investment that I make as a bank, the bank and I make in protecting against these attacks, and it is huge. And then I might be with Jude talking to a charity where there's a handful of individuals with computers that they've bought doing really valuable work, but they're not IT specialists. So I don't have the answer, but we need to find a way, and this is where research and work with academia and our industry partners can help, is how do we take the knowledge and the capability that's available to me as a very large enterprise and make a subset of that available to charities, to health, to local councils, to the small companies who don't, in many occasions, don't even have an IT department, never mind a large investment in a security organisation like we have. And that's the challenge we have with this is you have to pass a driving test before you can drive a car on the road. You can just buy a computer, go online and hang out in some really suspicious neighbourhoods without any controls. And that's the kind of challenge we have. And I wish we had an answer. I don't. But working together, we can start to manage those impacts.
Thank you.
And the other thing that Chris would work very hard on is supply chain. So you can't just you can't just protect yourself. You have to try and make sure the people that you're interacting with are good custodians of your data and respect the cyber relationship between yourselves as well. So there is a lot of work that NatWest would do, Royal Bank of Scotland, around their supply chain as well. So, and I don't think, and we always say this to organisations, they'll never be 100% safe. Arnold Clark were a very well secure company. They still got attacked. I'm sure, I don't know what the budgets are for Marks and Spencer's, but I'm sure there are millions as well. They still had an attack, Co-op. And there's lots of other organisations that we don't hear about because sometimes people do pay the ransom or sometimes they don't pay the ransom, but they don't want to talk about it for fear of retribution or to losing that public will and good as well.
Thank you very much. ACC Stuart Houston, could I ask you, in your submission, you say there's been a rise in cybercrime involving physical harm with online groups exploiting vulnerable individuals to self-harm and share the content. Could you say anything about more the profile of these people? Is it mainly children and young adults? Is it mainly girls? And do you have any information on the gender split for sextortion. Any of that information would be useful.
Maybe answer the first bit. The sextortion stuff is pretty much, again, quite underreported. I don't have the figures to hand, but I can certainly provide them regarding the gender split on that. However, I think what we are seeing is that online-enabled violence, is how it's been termed, in relation to groups that are encouraging people to self-harm or to place marks on themselves and publish it online. That has been a sort of trend particularly across the US for some time, and we do see that to start to eke into other groups. Now, again, it's that network of people that may are unknown to each other and very much on encrypted platforms that are quite difficult to see, but it's the harm that causes. And I know today's session was not necessarily about in the indecent images aspect of online, which again is probably another full day subject that you can speak about. But this is quite prevalent, and I know that the National Crime Agency have actually placed it in their control strategy this year regarding online-enabled violence and how they're going to look at it. Now, there are specific things, like the COM network is one that gets mentioned quite a lot, and 764 gangs, which you'll hear about quite a lot in the media. That, again, is about exploiting the vulnerable. And the reason I mention that, and the fact is that that's not necessarily in the aspect of where there's money being made of some of the stuff that we've spoken about. That's about power of individuals over others and exploiting the vulnerability of other people for their own, enjoyment as such. So the reason I put that in there is one that is something that we, again, is a challenge, and it fits into the same challenges that are things about underreporting. How do we trace them? The fact is that they're operating potentially in other countries, and again, the legislation. There is legislation in regard to, encouraging people to do harm, and there could be, specific common law crimes that you could libel for that. Again, it's tracing those people to be in a position to libel those is a challenge for us, and one that we're looking at.
And what might help in the context of some of this is it's useful to know or bear in mind that your view of the internet and the platforms you interact with is very different to the view I get, which is very different to the view that my teenage son gets. Personal anecdote, I have an elderly relative who was the victim of online fraud a few weeks ago, even though they get a lot of regular briefings from me on things they shouldn't be doing, still fell victim. And it was interesting to see that when I looked at her social media feed, it was full of adverts, the majority of which looked suspicious to me, but were very targeted towards her as a lady in her 70s. Whereas if you look at my social media feed, it's tailored to me, middle-aged gent, lots of cycles and fine wine and that kind of stuff. You look at my sons, it's all about cats and the like. So the big social media platforms do a lot of heavy tailoring, and the people behind this know that. So if you want to target elderly people, you can build that profile and place an advert, maybe advertising a scam or something suspicious, and it will only hit that community of people. If you want to target young females, you can create an advert that looks at that demographic, and only those people will see it. So, in one hand, it's great that these platforms are tailoring the content. People are getting what they think they want to see, but it also introduces its own risks in that the frauds and scams and a lot of the attacks we worry about can be targeted to very specific populations, which then increases the probability of them being successful.
Thank you.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. Okay, Ben McPherson, then Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning all, and thanks for your time today and all that you're doing for our constituents. I mean, this is the criminal justice issue of our time, and not just domestically, but in many ways internationally, as you've said. I mean, I note that it was in recent years that the fraud epidemic in the UK was deemed to be a national security threat, and the issue seems to have only grown as a point of concern since then. And as you say, I mean, anyone can fall victim of it, and it's all of our responsibility to raise awareness in our constituencies. And I mean, in that spirit, I will say that we've all been targeted. Somebody phoned me pretending to be from my bank, and thankfully at the right point I realised that they weren't. But that just shows that even, I deem myself as quite tech savvy as well, and conscious of these issues. And I think that, we all have to have our wits about us and raise awareness in our constituency. I've had people impersonate me in contacting constituents. So we're really grateful to have you here in our Parliament and to consider what more we can do. And in that space, you know, you've talked a lot about the collaboration between law enforcement, the National Crime Agency, Commercial Scotland, local government, our devolved agencies, the third sector, both domestically and internationally. Is there anything more you want to emphasise about that importance of collaboration? And in that, you talked about legal change. UK government has undertaken a number of reviews. There's one ongoing. Criminal justice law, of course, is devolved. You know, is there more that needs to happen here as part of that UK-wide effort? You know, how do we make it easier to trace and evidence and prosecute? Because we've all got a responsibility here to enable those of you who are trying to hold these perpetrators to account and pursue them to be more robust and to also work with, whether it's commercial organisations or the public sector. I mean, SEPA have been a victim to this. The British Library is still, I think, experiencing its difficulties. You know, how do we work together to do more for our constituents?
Kick off.
So just initially, kind of like a positive point, we don't need to prosecute offenders here or have a criminal justice outcome in Scotland or United Kingdom to get an adequate and robust response. So one of the things that we do as a system is to work with partners, particularly in the Five Eyes of US, UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, in order to ensure we've got a moderated response and an appropriate response, and we play to our strengths and take action wherever we possibly can. And sometimes that action is to support an FBI or an Australian Federal Police investigation to take action in another jurisdiction, which would be hard for us to reach, but easier for them to reach. And that's one of the things that we do. I think Chris really very well articulated the threat and how that works. I think the increase in the threat has been driven by this loose association of online entities, this kind of subculture of skilled people that work in a nefarious way, and that's really hard to combat. And as Stuart said, the rather concerning, worrying point of that is that threat is diversifying, not only just through fraud and financial motivation, but also into power dynamics, which will relate to violence, perpetrating violence, encouraging violence against individuals, and also disrupting service for the sake of disrupting our service. So that diversification, you know, is an added layer of complexity to what is already a complex piece. I think to go back to Mr. Kerr's point about whether the traditional response is working or not. Well, I would say our traditional response is for policing, law enforcement to work in partnership with other public bodies and the public themselves. And I think that does work for us, and that's what we need to continue to do and to get that message out there. So just as it's important to put locks on your windows and your doors and lock your car with an alarm, it's just equally as important to ensure that your passwords are changed regularly, that you keep up to date with your security patching, that you do two-factor authorization, that sort of authentication, that sort of thing is going to help us. The point I'd close is that the advances in a threat, for example, artificial intelligence is a threat, but is also an opportunity for us to work to better and process that information better, but also for us to tackle the threat. And that is one thing that we are doing to be more proactive, to waste criminals' time, to disrupt criminals online and stop that offending, change the circumstances that offending never gets close to NatWest. We need to do more of that, absolutely. So I think but I'll stop short of saying, you know, we enforce the laws that Parliament make, so I wouldn't wish to make changes in relation to that.
Appreciate that. And just in that space, of course, there are lots of people like myself where fraudsters tried to steal from us or otherwise, but we managed to recognise it was a scam at the right point, and that didn't happen. But how important it is that even if you're not a victim of the fraud and you manage to become aware that this is not a genuine person who's calling from my bank or whoever it may be, to report. I mean, how is that intelligence useful to you, that for people to go on and make sure that they report, so that you're getting the widest availability of evidence from the public?
Yeah, absolutely. So making that threshold reporting easier is a thing to do, because that will help with that shared awareness and common purpose of deflecting those threats. Absolutely. And looking to intervene in every stage of that event chain that Chris talked about, and change the circumstances so it's even more difficult for criminals to exploit those events, both right from the beginning of a threat vector penetrating a individual or a system, through to how they may dispose of the proceeds of their crime through crypto, making that even more difficult for criminals globally is an important part of the response that we work together on a day-to-day basis.
And I think what's really, really valuable is a single fraud or scam may be really hard to investigate in isolation. But when we get a big picture, suddenly you start to see things that are common across those different events, and that's when we start to take leads. And we do that within financial services. We share intelligence with our peers, and it's not unusual that it's not until we talk to one of our peer banks and take their information that we start to see, well, there's this commonality, maybe there's these accounts in common or these addresses in common, and then we can pass that information on to law enforcement. So it's really important that we'd have that intelligence sharing and recognise that each one in isolation may not lead to a successful prosecution, but when you start to get the bigger picture, that's when the value starts to be found.
Yeah, but
we work with NatWest and some other banks and Police Scotland and the NCA and London, or the Met as well in London. On a Tuesday we do a fraud call, and it's an hour of people's time. We try and not waste the time. We just share that intel. It's a group of people who trust each other, from Barclays, from NatWest, from Metro. I can't remember all the rest of them today. And it's an hour of people's time. We share that information, we share the intelligence, and people then say, I've seen this, I've seen that. At the end of it, then we take the information then back. We then share it then on social media as well to say, this is what we've seen. This morning I shared one around gold scams for high net worth older people. So we're taking it. We're not just taking the intelligence, we're not just sharing it. We have to try and get it out there as well. But we also have to get it out, not just on social media. We need to reach the people that aren't on social media, but also speak in a language that people understand. I work in cyber. I didn't know what 2FA was or MFA was for a while, and actually I hate it, but I know the reason why we have to use it and why it's so important. And what I'm trying to do is say to people, it's on all of our internet banking, it's on, Marks and Spencer's, it's on our Next, go into your security settings. But we have to be very mindful that these people are not security. They're not, I think, how would my dad understand it? How would my mum understand it? And try and get that language across so that the older people and younger people probably know more than us, but people who are not tech savvy. And that's not, we shouldn't be looking down on people and thinking, because I could get caught tomorrow as well.
Nicola Taylor, I want to bring you in just a second, but I just want to add into the discussion if anyone wants to say anything. You talked about younger people being more savvy, the need for greater awareness amongst the population who are potentially more vulnerable. But there's also, and David Keenan talked about this, the demand on businesses and public sector organisations for the capability within the organisations and within the workforce to be able to counter this. And do we need to do more to build the skills and capacity within the population to have enough specialists to be able to cover all the organisations that are going to need protection?
Collaboration will only go so far, and I think we've already made the point that collaboration does work, but we had, so Arnold Clark attack happened on Christmas Eve. it's very difficult to get the people that you need gathered. You know, at holiday season, it was very difficult to get instant response organisations that had more people available. My issue is that I think we need investment, but the investment that we need is for just in case. And it's very hard to get just in case investment because that's when we'll need it. If we had a level of 2 SEPA attacks at the same time, we don't have the people that we need to manage something like that. If we had 4 councils attacked in the last few weeks, we don't have the people or in any of the organisations that we need to do that. So I think we need to look at how, as a country, if there was, you know, we can't then depend on law enforcement down south to help us when there's 2 attacks going on with Co-op and Marks and Spencer's. We need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet up here and to be able to support organisations when these attacks are happening.
So that we have good resilience, but we need to build more resilience in our capabilities.
And I wouldn't even say we have good resilience. You know, there's a preconception that people, that organisations have instant response plans, that they have the, you know, things on their board to talk about cybersecurity. That doesn't happen in a lot of businesses in Scotland. We get so
private sector, not
private
public
sector. And
would you think we have the resilience in the public sector?
Well, when you look back to SEPA, no, we don't have that. We don't have the resilience in house. And again, that's investment that people have to have. And going back to West Lothian Council and Edinburgh Council, we've seen the councils announce budgetary cuts for everything in the last few months. There's going to be millions probably added on now for the clean-up operation after the cyber attack in West Lothian. So it will be us as residents that will have to pay that, or government and stuff. So I think what I'm going back to is the investment has to be there. And I think there's a project going on with the local government digital office around trying to build a SOC capability and cyber capability for all of the councils to come together rather than people operating on separate budgets. I think that's a really good way to go, because from the SEPA, if you read the report on the SEPA attack, a lot of people said SEPA need a SOC. It's very difficult, a security operations centre, so it's very difficult for us to say that all public sector organisations should have security operations centres. There is no budget there to do that. So I think thinking like the digital office around getting the councils together, the NHS in Dundee as well, so they're thinking collaboratively how they support each other. But I think for government, they need to get on board with what's working, what technologies working, what support is working, testing the resilience. Will they be able to operate if they do have a secure? But all that has to be, I think, mandated from a government perspective. How secure are we as a nation? And I don't know the answer to that because I'm not employed in there.
I'm taking from that, and correct me if I'm interpreting you incorrectly, but I think what you're saying there is that some business organisations have good resilience, but many could have better resilience.
Yeah, and I'm not blaming people for not, because it is budgets. It's huge budgets. You see what Chris has to spend to do what he does.
Some public sector organisations could have better resilience, particularly in your citing because of the attacks that have happened. Yeah. Some local authorities, some health boards. I mean, I think SEPA is the only national agency that's been a victim of a major cyber attack in Scotland, which would suggest that a number of the national agencies are secure. And I just want to give the public that reassurance. I mean, we might want to ask the government for that as a follow-up today, but I don't want to create undue alarm. But I'm
not, and I'm saying I'm not causing alarm, but prepare for the work. That's what we're asking people, is to make sure that that organisations are able to carry out what their core purpose is. I think West Lothian Council was a good example, that they were able to have children do their exams, but there will be a cost to that. Mm-hmm. So, and no organisation will be 100% safe.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, Nicola, you could come on in, and then I'll bring in Liam.
It was to pick up more on the kind of collaboration point, I guess. You know, we've heard the numbers around the table today. They are huge, they are frightening, and it's certainly a bigger task than any one individual or one organisation will be able to tackle, which is exactly why Cyber Scotland Partnership was formed in the first instance, to bring as many voices round the table as we possibly could in order to help address the challenge that we're facing as a nation. I think it's also important to recognise that Scottish Government do take this very seriously and have been very supportive in respect of investment. There is always things that can be done. There will always be more investment needed in this area because we'll constantly be trying to keep up with the threat actors that exist out there. But there are initiatives like public sector upskilling funding, for example, which has allowed public sector organisations to access upskilling funding for individual employees within the organisation to upskill in cybersecurity qualifications. There's a huge skill shortage around those who have the specific skill set that are needed. But for the last 3 years, funding has been made available to public sector organisations to help address that skill shortage. I think it's also important to recognise that from a business perspective, again, Scottish Government have been very good at recognising the need to get information out there and get organisations to understand why it's important that they look at their own cybersecurity posture. And again, for the last kind of 3 or 4 years, there has been funding made available to these organisations to access funding for Cyber Essentials accreditation, which means we're looking to kind of baseline as many of our organisations as possible to that kind of minimum standard. So whilst there's always a need for further investment, I think it's important that we recognise that, particularly the Scottish Government take this seriously already and have made some investment into that to get us to where we need to be. So I just wanted to point that out.
What's probably worth just adding to Jude's comments is there's a maturity around how you respond and protect around cybersecurity, and you can put all of the defences and controls you have available to you in place, but ultimately something could or may eventually go wrong, and that's where the term that's used a lot nowadays is operational resilience. So plan for the worst. How would you maintain service if your technology was disrupted? And your technology can be disrupted for many reasons. Cyber is one of those, but it could be a pure technical failure that leads to the technology being unavailable. So within financial services, both within the UK and internationally, something that we do regularly is a set of scenarios and exercises where we work through what would we do if we did have a huge outage, either with us or one of our peers, and how would we ensure that our customers continue to receive the service they need. And I don't know Scottish Government well enough to know whether it's something you do, but again, it might be something to consider for the future around how you would maybe exercise or model what your response would be if there was another SEPA-type incident, because having that muscle memory, having gone through those steps, ensures that you can respond much more rapidly should the worst ever happen. And hopefully the worst never will happen. But having that preparation up front is really, really valuable and minimises the impact on your customers and citizens should something go wrong.
The Scottish Government do carry out, but it's down to individual agencies as well, whether they do carry out the exercising around that. Yep. Scottish Government we actually at the Centre won a tender 4 years ago for delivering exercise, the NCSC exercise in a box, and we delivered that to 2,500 organisations, including public sector. But what I would state is we carry out fire testing and drills in organisations probably 2-3 times a year. We should be doing that around cybersecurity in organisations as well, and not just doing one every so often and then forgetting about it. It is something we should be doing because things do change, your supply chains change, your organisation changes, your people changes. So make sure that we are not just having an instant response plan, but we are carrying out that testing as well.
I am going to bring in Liam Kerr just to ask a follow-up to one of Ben's earlier questions, and then I'll bring in Fulton McGregor.
I'm very grateful. ACC Houston, unlike elsewhere in the UK, the proceeds of crime in Scotland, of which I think there have been some significant seizures, can't be used for policing, as I understand it, or, for example, for agencies such as the Cyber Fraud Centre or Victim Support or Prevention or anything like that. Do you have any idea why? And appreciating Police Scotland is there to keep us safe rather than make policy. That is our job. But do you take a view on whether Parliament might look to change that?
I think we've seen this played out across other jurisdictions. So, for example, the Roku network within England and Wales use a lot of proceeds of crime money to fund various aspects of tackling serious and organised crime, which includes cyber. Now, again, that could get either through staffing, equipment, I think the main thing that I would say is what they are able to do with some of that extra money is enhance their capabilities, which is the big part, and that's where we need to do. At the moment with ourselves, we build the capability with what we have within, and again, we are obviously funded in our block grant, and we take that from within there to fund that, and we don't, as you rightly said, we don't get access to the proceeds of crime that is seized. That has become quite interesting. The fact is the value of some of the cryptocurrency, if we're sticking with the cyber theme. So we've seen cryptocurrency that we've been involved in criminality in Scotland since 2019 increase by 2,000% the amount of cryptocurrency that we see being used in criminality. Now that varies in value, and we have seen the benefit, I know, of some areas of policing in other parts of the UK where they've set up dedicated teams to go after that crypto and try and ensure that that's seized in the appropriate way. So it does benefit, and without doubt it would enhance our capability if we were able to access that additionality to do that, but with understanding that it was used to deliver against organised crime or cyber where it is in others. The Police Service in Northern Ireland also have that capability, and I know that from previous their involvement they've used that for financial crime and how they've generated further enhancements in chasing those for their particular version of asset recovery. So it is a useful tool. It is used quite effectively in other areas across the country. And I do see the real benefits in being able to do that, and the fact is that you're returning it into what you're facing. The other part of proceeds of crime is it's that real element of towards the criminal, and the fact is that we say that the money you've made through criminality is now going to fund directly people to go and come back and chase you or your colleagues. It must have a bit of an impact as well, and I think it is really relevant. So I do think if it was possible for something else to look at and how we could look to obtain proceeds of crime money in a slightly different way, and probably on a par with our colleagues south of the border.
I'm very grateful, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Philip McGregor.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning to the panel. It's been a really interesting session, so thank you for all your contributions. I was going to ask about the protections for vulnerable people, but I think we've actually had quite a good discussion on that, and Adam and Jude and others have already contributed, particularly with regards to older people, which is where my question was going to be. But what I wanted to ask instead was about increasing that resilience in the population overall, and this is obviously something that's maybe for a wider discussion and not for today's panel, but it has struck me today just while we've been talking, particularly in the exchanges with Ben McPherson a couple of moments ago. Has there been any discussion at any level about perhaps internet safety at this sort of level being brought in as almost a mandatory thing within schools, for example? Because if you can start implementing it at a very young age, you can increase the resilience of the population over time so that people are less vulnerable. I'm just wondering, I don't even know who would be maybe best asking that, but I'm just wondering if that's something that's been discussed or thought about, and who would deliver it?
Do you want to come in and then maybe Nicola?
Yes, it's a hard one because, again, as I say, younger people are a lot more savvy than we are. I don't know if anybody watched that programme Adolescence, and it was an eye-opener even for me working in cybersecurity, and as a parent of 2 kids. I didn't want to believe that some young person would be involved in something like this. My fear is that we as parents are putting too much then onto schools. So the schools, again, going back to the purpose of organisations and the purpose of schools, they're there to educate our children. So as parents, I think in society we should be aware of what our kids are doing and what they're, what are they doing online? How can they protect themselves? We have issued a guidance on the back of that thing of Adolescence as well around, a guide for keeping children safe online for parents and carers. We have actually shared it with schools so that they can send it to parents to say, in a softer way to say, please be aware of what your children are doing. I think we need to, and also the level of what you go in with education as well, that we can't go in at a basic level because they are a lot more savvy and tech savvy than we are.
But is it, given that it's here now and it's here to stay, is it any different than schools teaching about road safety, which they do very effectively? And is there also perhaps an element of a postcode lottery, because I know that actually my kids' primary school do a wee bit of work on that. So is there an argument there that there should be something more standard across the board?
But I think schools do, and again, we probably need somebody from education. I think schools do this. Like I know with my daughters, they get assemblies on it, you know, with different current subjects and stuff that come up. And I think it would be unfair to think that we don't do it. But my point is we shouldn't depend. We're asking them to educate our children. We're asking them to raise attainment and stuff as well. It shouldn't just be left to teachers and schools to do this. And I think they do it really well. But it is, and probably Stuart, I'll hand over to some of the stuff as well. It's not just the online security. It's that harm bit as well. That like everything today, it is a big issue.
I maybe touched that. We've got a cyber harm team who sit within our cyber and fraud unit who do engage in packages developing for education, but also for volunteer groups and other clubs and associations that particularly children, and we have tailored it in relation to older people as well about how that sort of safety from harm online, some of the stuff I've spoken about, particularly where social media can be harmful, about what they may be encouraged to go into and look at, and certain platforms that may drag young people particularly into. So we do quite a bit of work in that, and again it's about trying to, it's a very difficult message, as Judith touched on. Some of the younger people may have more knowledge of some of these apps than what we have, and it's about us trying to keep pace with that as well. And again, I maybe come back to it's really useful about to tailor that response and that prevention messaging. You need to know what's happening, and maybe to come back to Mr McPherson's question about what happens if we don't report. We don't report, we don't know about what harms we need to go and try and prevent. So that's that whole holistic approach is we need to know what's out there, we need to know what the harms are for us allowed to go and tailor our prevention messaging to push it in the right area, and that includes age, geography, whatever that may be, so that we can actually make sure we're getting the message right. So everything we do is built on what's happening out there. So it's that getting that understanding of the real sort of true picture of what the threat is from cyber, whether it be social media groups that are encouraging kids to do things. And we've seen that in the past where there was pranks that ended up in fatal consequences for kids that were put online on social media. Things like that we need to know about so that we can at least push the message in the right direction.
Okay, thanks. I think, as I said earlier, it's a question that came to me during the discussion. I think it would be a very wide-ranging discussion, I think. But thanks.
Nicola, would you like to just come in?
I think I'd just like to add that the challenge within the schools is it's a bigger conversation than just around internet safety. You know, it's password authentication, all of these things. So it becomes more of a task and a bigger conversation than we've probably been able to have to date. I would like to stress that there are definitely things happening in school. Most of the schools now are big supporters of Internet Safety Day, for example, so there's a whole day dedicated to it where there's assemblies and workshops and things that are run throughout the schools, and that information is disseminated from a group. So the teachers, it's not extra workload for the teachers, it's packs that they can then just deliver into the classrooms. Certainly those schools that have kind of Chromebooks and iPads and things within the classrooms, or the individual pupils are getting them, there is information that they get around, you know, being safe online and making sure that their passwords are not shared and those types of things. But there's also a number of initiatives that allow private sector to go into schools as well and share more information. So we run a Digital Critical Friends programme, there is STEM ambassadors and these initiatives as well, which means that schools, should they want additional information, can certainly get access to that.
It's a really good question, but I think it does go beyond just schools, actually. But I think there's a considerable appetite from the public to be as informed as they possibly can about threats and how to mitigate against them, and also just actually generally to be safe in how they want to kind of live their lives online or not be attacked online. One of the most popular information guides that we have at Age Scotland of the 70+ is about scams and fraud, and I think that updates, you know, semi-regularly because the nature of them will change a lot. And I think the key elements that are required here about that good information that's not patronising, that's kind of simply written, so we're not using jargon like 2FA and MFA and all the rest of it at times, because I know there'll be people who go, I don't know what that is. At all, I've been immediately switched off, so to speak, from that. How to access the kind of free and low cost systems to protect themselves as well. I think we might have this on whether it's maybe built into certain digital devices, but actually if you're getting an approach by a text message and you click on a link, you're maybe not sure how secure your device is, or if you're kind of protected from malware or ransomware. And particularly those people who are now no longer, say, in the workplace, who might be using own personal devices. We've got 15% of pensioners in poverty. We've got half of Scottish pensioners have incomes lower than the threshold for paying income tax. The ability to keep up with the technology and pay for it is pretty tough as well if we're expecting people to be operating online. So I think there are some things that we could try and make available to people. They know where to go and get the kind of good kind of protections for themselves in this. And there's actually one really great, I think, example I think Cyber Scotland put together a few years ago, which we helped contribute to some degree, but a DigiKen adverts, which was to I think Fred Macaulay was the host of this, but it was about the older person wasn't the person wrong. It was like a game show type thing. The older person got all the questions right, but you're looking at password updates, two-factor authentication, and kind of updating your devices. It was a really great series of adverts, and at the time it was almost like this was a new thing. Could you create the case that we need to keep doing this? Well, it's obviously important, but it becomes a bit of a flash in the pan. So regular discussions about this, using quite smart and engaging ways to talk about being safe online and kind of being protecting yourself from cyber risks, I think is an important responsibility of our kind of the public services, if you will, our government and all others, to make sure we're funding that well enough. So it's not just, Cyber Awareness Week. Well, it's our Scams Awareness Week. It's got to be every blooming week, doesn't it, to be helpful.
So the Cyber Fraud Centre created those with Fred Macaulay, and it was at a time when Fred was cheaper because of COVID, if he's listening or watching today. So, and also STV as a partner, they were very good as a platform to help get that message out, so that collaboration worked as well. And I think going back to the platform bit that I've forgotten, and probably we've all forgotten about, that we're talking about harm to kids, we're talking about harm to older people as well. The platforms that allow this are not carrying out their duty of care as well, and it's quite difficult, and police and banks will tell you, for us in Scotland to get in contact and to get anything done when we find harmful content, or we find a way of children or older people engaging in harmful content. So I think the big platforms, if there's anything that government can do around that, and pulling them to task to say, you're paying for this. Some people are engaged. They're getting paid per, they're getting paid per user and stuff as well. But they have to carry out that duty of care to protect the people that use their platforms as well.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Rona Mackay, I think you want to come in.
Yes, thanks, convener. I was to ask Adam. I'm thinking about the number of bank closures in our communities. And, that jury's out the bottle. We're not going to go back to traditional banking now. Do you have evidence of some of your members or older people, not wanting to use banks now because of the threat that they might lose their money? I mean, are they going back to putting their money under the mattress sort of thing?
I don't think it's necessarily going under the mattress. There's certainly a level of concern about how to access these systems because they don't necessarily feel they have the support. This is why people are so exercised about losing a bank branch, and without wanting to go over the old ground on this, the footfall will change in bank branches because people aren't kind of cashing in paychecks and pensions every single week. It's not the same way of doing that. It's the nature of what branches were doing over time changed. We had a really strong view for years that branches should have a really important role in actually supporting people to change how they bank, to kind of help them in person learn how to be safe online, how to access financial information and some degree of financial kind of independence there, different products.
Banks have a role there
I do, and I think that's about, we've easily seen this kind of absolute move away from being on our high streets and communities. Of course, there are the default had been to the post office for simple things, but actually it doesn't really do all of the same things. It's for simple transactions, and when the post office network is under threat or fragile, then of course then there is no resilience there. The shared banking hubs is something we were promoting since 2016 actually, and it's been obviously taking off, but there are parts of the country we know, and presumably members here at times have been looking for such a solution in their constituencies or in their areas, and they've not been possible yet. So I think there is a challenge for people to be able to bank and have financial independence with if they're wholly reliant being online, and it's not, again, looking at the number of people who aren't comfortable, there's a risk. There's a risk there that people are left behind, and our financial lives are much more than just simple cash in, cash out transactions, which is not really what branches were doing. And I think they were fantastic places on high streets across the country to maybe do something different with how they kind of support customers. And so I didn't realise NatWest in the rooms is not meant as a direct dig, but you'll probably have seen over years gone by Age Scotland comments outcry about the bank branch closure networks. Speaking to many of your colleagues about this, so it's not meant as a direct piece there. But I think there is a responsibility from those that we are, if you're moving everyone, broadly speaking, now to digital use, what else can you do to support them? And I think to your point earlier, Chris, about the proliferation of kind of the systems, maybe making these things kind of available to customers is quite important. So the system you've got at your end, or any bank, sorry, not an NatWest point, might be safe, but people's access point into that might not be. And we've seen lots of examples of people, to your point, Ms McPherson, of banks purporting to be themselves to you, and it's pretty convincing. You can mask phone numbers. We'll just look at the back of your bank card with the same number. Of course, you can tell us these things. So I think the ability to go in, speak to a real person, and just get some security and kind of is absolutely invaluable. Yeah. And we will lose that. And we will have a hidden challenge of people who do not feel comfortable interacting with society and having their own independence, not relying on a family member to go and do their online banking, which opens them up to financial harm and elder abuse of things as well.
Much wider consequences.
Yeah, that's the extreme end. But I think if we as a country want to make sure that people are supported to be independent and live well, then all of these factors are important.
Sure, thank you. Can I ask one more question? Is that okay? I'd like to ask David, and you may not be able to answer, and you may not want to answer, but when your organisation was attacked in 2022, what did it cost you? What did you lose in business? Do you have that? Or can you
it's difficult to put an exact figure on it. It depends exactly what you include. So loss of revenue through to things like legal fees, but we would put the figure in the tens of millions of pounds.
How long did that period last when you were under attack, so to speak?
The attack itself was a matter of hours,
really?
But the recovery period was 6 months plus.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. Yeah, you come.
Just, and I'm sure you'd want me to say this, as would others, and if anyone's listening, if anyone does phone you pretending to be your bank, hang up and then phone your bank back. I just think it's a really important message that we send out.
It's our crime prevention duty for the day. Email Ben McPherson. Yep. Can I just stay with David and perhaps even bring in Chris? And one of the kind of points that I made earlier on was about just the emotional impact on particularly your workforce, for example. So that whole disruption to not just the service that you offer within the business, but how was there a feeling perhaps across your staff body of being targeted, of being a little bit vulnerable? I'm very interested in how being attacked in such a sort of hard way impacted your workforce. I think it's something that maybe we sort of overlook, but we talk about our older population and protecting young people, but I'm interested in how this impacts on people working within an organisation, or Marks and Spencers for that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. So the immediate aftermath of the attack itself, and the immediate aftermath was almost pure shock, having experienced it. Then it was very quickly going into response and recovery. And the efforts of the IT teams, the IT department, was absolutely heroic in terms of recovering from it. It was long months of 12 and 14-hour days to restore the systems. Outside of the IT team, across the wider organisation, the impact on employees was very much around their inability to be able to do their job on a day-to-day basis, and then the frustration that they were faced with of our customers coming in and not being able to transact with us in the way that they expected to. So that was very difficult for lots of members of staff to be able to just not be able to perform their roles, for in some cases not to be able to perform adequately or in the way that they expected for months post incident.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, Chris, if it's something that you maybe have a view on, just that, the emotional toll, the well-being toll on victims.
Yeah, so where I get very superstitious and touch the words. NatWest as a bank has remained robust against the attacks we're seeing, but I have worked with peers in other industries who have fallen victim to these attacks, and it has a huge toll on the workforce. The recovery can involve many months of working around the clock to fix systems. That shouldn't be underestimated in terms of the impact, which is why I have huge sympathy for Marks and Spencer and the firms that are currently recovering from attacks, because I know what they'll be going through. And as a community, people who do my job in industries, one of the hot topics we have is how do you prepare for this? And we talk about how do you get food in, how do you get water in, do you need to have sleeping accommodation in the office? There's a whole load of things that we don't think about, but when you see these attacks happening for real, are things that companies have to do to manage that recovery. And it does have a huge toll on people. So it's absolutely something we think about, and it's probably worth saying, Arnold Clark, it's fantastic they're still they're here to talk about it. There are also a lot of companies around the world who've gone out of business. The cost of recovery was too much. And at that point, it's not just the loss of a business, it's all the staff who've lost their jobs, and the impact is quite wide as well. So we're talking about these attacks, but it does have real impact in a wide range of ways, and that we really need to be conscious of.
Yeah. And maybe, Stuart, just from the sort of policing perspective, your officers are dealing with victims every day. Is this something that officers perhaps are given some support or even training around in terms of how to interact with victims of this type of crime, but also obviously the advice and support that they can offer them in the aftermath?
Yeah, it's really important that we get people there that are going to speak to the victims that actually have the knowledge and understanding of the technical questions they may need to ask. And I think that's really important, because what you don't want to do is have to go back to somebody 3 or 4 times and just all you're doing is re-traumatising them, asking very different things by different people. Is getting that right from the first place. And that, again, that's I think where we're looking to go forward from now as part of our approach, is to utilise the fraud, cybercrime reporting and analysis service from which is administered by the City of London Police, but will cover all UK forces as part of Report Fraud. And I think that's really important, is that first contact with someone is to say, this is what you need to do, stop it now, to actually make sure you're not losing any more money, if it's money, or if they're still connected to the person and there's some sort of harm going on. It's about getting that right advice from that first point of contact, which is really important. And that's where we see going forward, that's what we're going to have to make sure that we can do from that first engagement. And then following it through about some of the aftercare opportunities, and there is some pointing towards some of the third sector organisations that may help, particularly Age Scotland or anyone else, but also going back to their bank and asking the right questions about some of that financial support they may be able to offer as well through different care packages that they have. So it is a very wide aspect of how we cover with victims.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I wonder if we've got a little bit of time in hand, so I'm just going to come in with a couple of questions on issues that we've touched on today, and happy for any other members to come in with final questions that they wish to ask. So just last month, this is on EU cooperation, and coincidentally, just last month, the committee heard evidence from academics on criminal justice cooperation with the European Union, and we were told that access to the European Union Agency for Cyber Security would be, and I quote, relevant to coordinating cybersecurity positions and highlighting new cybersecurity threats that have emerged. So I'm very interested to ask if, for your thoughts on whether the loss of access to Europol, for example, or the Agency for Cybersecurity and their databases, is this impacting or hampering our effectiveness here in the UK in terms of tackling cybercrime? So should we be focusing, particularly when in the middle of obviously the TCA review, is there something there that is relevant to be raised or certainly discussed in terms of addressing gaps in sort of criminal justice cooperation, but particularly in the sort of cybercrime space that we're discussing today? And I've been, maybe bring Miles in first on that.
Thanks, Committee. So I think the TACA arrangements that were put in place are effective and have been used by UK law enforcement, but in particular Police Service of Scotland, very well in order to ensure that there is a continuity of cooperation and collaboration with European law enforcement agencies and prosecuting agencies. Because of that extraterritorial nature of the threat and the need to have that shared awareness and common purpose across it. There is a Europol Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force that's in existence, and Police Service of Scotland are well, I'm talking for Stuart here, but Police Service of Scotland are a member of that, a very active member, and indeed lead some of the work that the agency, the task force does. From a National Crime Agency perspective, we support the wider Europol network and ethos. We ensure that the UK is well represented and that forces like Police Service of Scotland have a place there and don't get in the way of that, most importantly, and support that. So that's something that we would seek to continue going forward, to strengthen even further if we could, if the opportunity were there. But obviously that's a political discussion and agreement to be made by those that are democratically elected to do so. But hopefully that answers your question. I don't know if Stuart was there.
If anyone who wants to come in, perhaps Stuart or Chris?
Yeah, just I suppose we have an officer still based with Europol who is a Police Scotland officer, and we have an officer with Interpol, and again that's that strengthening that relationship that we have and operate on a daily basis about ensuring that we are kept up to date in any matter. And the task force that Miles has commented upon, we are an active member of that and engage regular. I think the actual cyber investigators across the world is actually quite a really, really unique group of people, and the fact is it crosses into the private sector and other agencies really, really easily because it is a shared threat, and I think that's really important. We are part of that shared threat of looking at it and collaborating as much as possible. So any improvement to that would be great. I think when we start to look at some of the challenges ahead of us is about dark web and encrypted platforms that may operate out with Europe and even not in the remit of the US become more challenging. But that's something that we're all facing together, and all the countries are working together to do that.
Thank you. I think, Rona, do you want to come in? No.
Not on this.
Not on this. I'll come back to you. If I can just ask a follow-up, and then I'll bring in Ben first. I noticed, Jude, your submission, I think it was your submission that references EU-UK cooperation, and obviously you speak about budgetary pressures, geopolitical sort of changes and challenging to keep supporting our own entities. I don't know if there's anything more that you want to come in on just with this in relation to this particular issue around cooperation.
Yeah, just that we can't depend on, we have probably a dependence on other people helping Scotland, and everybody as an Irish person, everybody wants to help Scottish people. So, but I think we're seeing all of these budgetary pressures in the US, we're seeing them in Europe as well, and we're seeing them in other countries as well. So we just need to be mindful that they could affect threat intel and other projects and stuff that we are doing. So we need to be, things that happen out with Scotland will affect us.
Yeah, got you. Thank you. Ben, do you want to come in? And then I'll bring in
Thank you.
Rona.
Just in this area, and recall attending Cyber Scotland Week, which takes place in February and March, and I remember doing so in 2020. And one of the most powerful presentations and conversations that I had at that point was with colleagues who'd joined from Estonia. And I just wondered, from that jurisdiction, who are right on the edge of Europe, combating a lot of the time cybersecurity attacks from the Russian state, are we learning from these countries that are really quite at the forefront of not just the battle but also the expertise?
A good connection with Villar Luby that's based in the UK. So he probably was Villar that you spoke to. He is the Estonian ambassador to the UK, and he regularly visits Scotland. We also have an Estonian ambassador here. I can't remember the name of the person that's appointed now. It is a Scottish person that is appointed. Those relationships, Consul General, yes. So those relationships do go ahead. I think Estonia have huge budgets around, but I think it's a very unique situation that they find themselves in, and because probably history of what they have had to go through has made sure that they have invested very heavily around cybersecurity. But there are conversations going on between Estonia and Scotland, yes.
Okay.
To add to that, and just in addition, so we're aware of countries where a lot of these organisations undertaking the cyber attacks work from, one of them being in Russia. This is the taking of money from law-abiding people in our country, in our democratic country, out from our country and into other places. I mean, is there a wider concern about that finance being part of the build-up of power, of greater abilities from those OCGs or whatever they may be in other jurisdictions? I mean, where is this? Everyone's aware of the situation that there are organised cyber attack organisations in Russia, but where else across the world is this going to, and what do we need to be mindful of?
So I think, so the money goes to many places. It's funding some regimes around the world that aren't aligned to our interests. And it's one of the reasons why the National Cybersecurity Centre at the moment are heavily promoting not to pay the ransom, for example, because they can see this money going out of the country, either supporting development of further crime networks or into, in some cases, nation states and regimes that aren't aligned to our interests. So it's something we absolutely have to be aware of. This money is leaving the country in a large number of cases, and that's to the detriment of us on many fronts.
Just to follow on Chrissy's point there, these are professional organisations. This is an industry, and they're doing it because they want to make money, and they can make money because companies in the UK do pay ransoms and can pay ransoms, and that's something that possibly should be considered.
And are insured by insurance companies to pay ransom as well. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to bring in Rona Mackay.
Just a brief question, really probably for Jude. And apologies if I missed this earlier in the session, but I'm just wondering, when companies are attacked and retail organisations, whether it's Arnold Clark or, say, Marks and Spencer's. Now, I buy online from Marks and Spencer's, as lots of people do. How safe is our personal data in that situation? You know, when
there was an announcement yesterday. In the beginning, they did announce that they didn't think there was any personal data taken, but they announced yesterday that yes, there has been customer data, no banking details, both customer name, address, and your purchasing history as well. So that has been taken. What? Yeah. Oops. And again, going back to, yes, that's really bad. I would say to everybody, check out a website, Have I Been Pawned? PWNED. Put in your email address or your various email addresses and see how many times the companies that you deal with have been attacked and where your data is. So make sure that you change your password if that's what you're. So you're going to ask.
I was just going to ask you, what can the person do?
What can the person do? So
yeah.
I think we all probably should, as Marks and Spencer's customers, we should have changed our passwords anyhow when we knew that they were attacked. What we should be doing, and I include myself as this as a citizen, is making sure we're not using the same passwords across different shopping sites.
Yeah.
I also don't save my card details to shopping sites, so because that could go, and also build in that extra security as well. So I know with 2 teenage girls, we have to verify all shopping from Amazon because they can't order stuff until we see what they're ordering and making sure that it is them ordering. So things like that go into. Yeah. I know for Next, for online, that you can put on 2FA, so go into your security settings and make sure you've got 2-factor authentication. There's an Irish saying, to be sure, so that's the only way I can describe 2-factor authentication. There's lots of things, so just, make sure that you're taking the guidance and advice, but be a few steps ahead once you know that there has been some sort of data breach. And I'm not saying to cause hysteria, I'm saying have a healthy paranoia all the time around your own personal security as well as the business security.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Pauline, you wanted to come back in and then we'll bring
this to thank you. I mean, just the last almost 2 hours, it just becomes apparent, which I think is what Bing McPherson was essentially suggesting, that this is a much bigger area of criminal law, a much bigger area of social concern than perhaps we realised when we started off this session. So I'm clear about that. I wondered, Chris, do you think that the government should legislate to outlaw the paying of ransom?
That's a difficult one. My personal feeling is I wouldn't pay a ransom. But I'm also conscious that there may be some extreme circumstances where, with the right support from law enforcement and government, paying might be the least of two evils. So, ideally, no, we should never pay it. But I can imagine some circumstances where it would be really hard not to, and therefore I would never say never.
So do you think we should have more regulation around it as to pay or not to pay, given what you said about where the money might be going? Yeah,
absolutely. I would encourage anyone who's in that situation to be engaged with law enforcement and government and the relevant agencies so that it's a combined decision on the best approach to take.
Yeah.
I would discourage anyone from unilaterally paying.
No, thank you. Just lastly, Stuart, I wanted to ask about, I think you'd said that you're difficult at recruiting people to fight cybercrime. Is that right?
I think more it's about the sort of the right people and how we maybe ensure that it's not always. I mean, we're policing is built on someone has a warrant card to go and do a role. I think really the fact is we need to look at a mixed workforce, and the fact is a lot of the work that's done, and particularly in cyber, it doesn't need to be a person that's actually went to be a police officer for a number of years to do that. And I think we need to look wider. The skills that we've mentioned about that are available in some of the universities in Scotland, how do we bring those people into roles in policing as part of a mixed workforce to look at this, more than just a police officer?
So would that be done by the National Crime Agency, or is it Police Scotland?
Police Scotland, I know the National Crime Agency do that as well. They recruit different people from different backgrounds, and the fact is it's not always been a law enforcement background, but it may be data scientists, ethical hackers, it may be someone that's got a more specialist skill set that would enhance our capabilities more than anything else.
But you are able to recruit directly people for those skills if you decide that they're needed?
Absolutely, we do. We'll look to how we can increase our police staff numbers to that mixed sort of workforce instead of, as I say, just being police officers. But again, that requires funding. That requires, an increase in how our capability of how many people we can bring in to do that, and how we can support the front line of policing still, but also making sure we've got the right people for the right skills, particularly in a really, at times, more technical area of law enforcement.
I mean, given what we've just been hearing about kind of the international aspect of it and the fighting crime of people that are clearly very skilled and intelligent, it may be in a very attractive career for somebody who sees that they could use their skills to go after these people. So do you agree that maybe a bit more discussion, public promotion about the need to resource this might attract the people that you need?
Definitely, and I think that comes down is again about how we fund that resource and changing from police numbers into police staff numbers in certain areas, and this is one in particular where I see the benefit of. We've already seen civilian investigators coming into roles where a warrant card is not required. That's, I think, really important in this area of business, that we get the right people to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Miles, did you want to come in on that?
To cap that off, so it's for Police Service Scotland to decide the kind of the skills mix they want and how they want that. There's a conversation that we have on an ongoing basis between the NCA and Police Service Scotland, not just in cybercrime but across the whole piece, about where we can provide, a national service once and do it cheaply and for best value to the taxpayer, where that is better delivered in Scotland. And I think things like data scientists and engineers, data architects, and the type of people that you might want to work at an industry level is where that conversation may have. Is that useful for an NCA to provide that type of thing as a service to law enforcement community or to UK PLC, or is that something that Police Service of Scotland require in-house? And that's something that we've got really strong relationships at command level, operational level, and we continue that conversation ongoing as the threat and response evolves. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I wonder if I can, I know we're just slightly over time, but we're probably not going to get the opportunity to have such an amount of expertise in the room again, so I'm shamelessly going to take advantage of that and just ask a final question about ransomware. I think Pauline McNeill touched on that just a moment ago, and the sort of pros and cons of, do you pay a ransom or do you as a business perhaps, what are the pros and cons of paying versus not paying? Obviously, David, your organisation, your business had to ask itself that question, presumably, and you may not wish to pick up on that. But are there things that businesses need to consider in that awful dilemma? Yeah. Chris?
Absolutely. I think the lesson we've learned from seeing lots of companies around the globe have this dilemma is that ultimately you are dealing with criminals, and even if you pay, there's no guarantee that you'll have a solution to your problem. We have seen instances of where people have paid and then at a later date the criminals have come back and said, well, we said we'd delete the data, but we didn't, so this time we will if you pay us again. Yeah. On the flip side, if there are occasions where paying does give you a tool to accelerate your ability to recover. They're quite rare, but if you are in a very difficult situation, it's something that you'd have to consider. On the flip side, the money is going to criminals. It's possibly leaving the country. It's something that we wouldn't want to encourage. So it's a really difficult dilemma, and I don't think any two instances are the same. But evidence has shown that paying doesn't always solve, or frequently doesn't solve the problem, and that needs to be a big factor.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if anyone, Jude, and then maybe David.
So we've seen it, and probably police have seen it on both sides as well. And we're not here to judge people or to critique people on why they're doing it. And I think it is a very well thought through conversation. And I'm sure people who haven't paid were tempted during the process. And I can say that with hand on heart. Where I've seen one that had a very moral dilemma, and a dilemma that I actually agreed with probably why they were going to do it, was when it was a legal firm that was attacked, and they knew what data had been taken. They knew that some of the data could, was witness statements, was victims of rape and other things that if it got out into the public domain, that it would be really harmful to those individuals. They were put on pressure by the board to pay it. It wasn't a huge amount. It wasn't the millions of pounds that we hear of ransom. It wasn't a huge amount of money. They were insured to pay it as well via their cyber insurance. So that was paid. But 2 days later, the data was still dumped on the dark web. So the way then I made the person feel better about it was, if you hadn't have paid it, the data, you would have been then, the board would have said, well, you made a decision not to pay it and the data was dumped, but you did pay it and the data was dumped anyhow. So sometimes you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Most organisations that we deal with don't pay the ransom, but there's a lot of organisations, we say, that the unreported ransom, that we do probably feel that they have paid it.
Yeah, thank you. David, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, it was something for discussion, and we absolutely took the decision we were not going to pay a ransom, but we were in the fortunate position of having robust backups in place and knew that we would be able to recover our systems and our data. We initially completely refused to engage with the criminals. But what we did learn relatively quickly was actually the engagement with them and the negotiating process was a useful tool in being able to draw out the length of time it took them to dump the data on the dark web, which allowed us to make contact with our customers, inform them of what had happened. So as the negotiating tool was useful for us as part of our response, but there was never any intent to pay a ransom. But like I say, lots of organisations wouldn't have been in the fortunate position of having backups to be able to recover from, and faced with that as a decision, I can't blame some organisations that might consider paying in those circumstances.
Yeah, very difficult one. Miles?
So if I may say, as we've heard, it's a really nuanced threat from a loose association of a subculture of individuals right through to criminals that are linked to the state that mean to do us harm. And so it's a really difficult one to judge. In individual circumstances are very different. So that point of using it as an opportunity and contacting law enforcement as quickly as possible, I think is a really important message. Along with, don't click on the link and hang up if that call is suspicious. If there is a ransomware attack, contact law enforcement because of some of the issues you've heard from Chris and David. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we'll draw things to a close there. We've just gone a little bit over time. I'm sure we could spend another hour throwing questions at you. It's been a very, very interesting session. Really grateful for your time. Thank you all for joining us this morning. And we'll have a suspension for 10 minutes and then we'll resume our business in public. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, members. So we'll now move on to our next item of business, which is to consider correspondence we've received on the 29th of April from the Minister for Children, Young People and the Promise, Natalie Dawn Innes, MSP. You'll be aware that this letter provided an update on the Scottish Government's work to restore secure care accommodation capacity for young people in Scotland. And I refer members to paper 3, which sets out the letter, and seek our views on what action, if any, we want to take in response. So I'm just going to open it up to any members that wishes to come in just with any comments or observations with regard to the correspondence at all. Nothing. Pauline McNeill and then Rona Mackay. Pauline.
Thanks. I'm glad this subject has come up because although there's a crossover between our role and the role of the Education and Young People Committee in relation to secure accommodation, I think from our perspective the important thing is to keep an eye on this to make sure that in the commitment that no young person under the age of 18 will be in custody, but they'll be in secure accommodation, that one, it doesn't have an unfair disadvantage on those that were there for other grounds, but also that there is sufficient accommodation. I mean, there was a rumour circulating, we never not confirmed, I have to say, that there was a case in court about a week ago where they didn't have secure accommodation. It has not been confirmed. However, it's a question I did have to the Minister at the time of the statement. Is she satisfied that we're going to have enough accommodation? Because when it comes to court matters, the Sheriff has got no cause now to ask if accommodation is available. It's just a question of if they're going to be detained, as previously the Sheriff would have asked, and if the secure accommodation wasn't available, then they would find some other arrangement, which is why some people such as William Lindsay Brown ended up in Pullman Prison. So I think it's a vitally important area for the Justice Committee to monitor as we go forward to for this policy to embed.
Very much. And yes, I think you're right, and indeed the correspondence from the Minister does outline an update with regard to secure accommodation, contingency planning, ensuring capacity, and details some of the work around that. I think you're right, that's probably one of the key areas, that particularly for this committee, that we would be looking to be provided, certainly with updates and follow developments. Rona Mackay?
Yes, thanks, Convener. I agree 100% with Pauline's comments. I think it's this is a bit of an ongoing situation. It seems St Mary's in my constituency was paused admissions, and that caused a shortage of beds. That pause has been lifted, but they still have less beds than they had before. And I see that Rossie up north has got 4 new beds, but does that offset the ones that St Mary's have lost? So I think there's an issue with capacity, and I'm really keen to ask for an update on the reform of the contractual model for the provision and the financing of secure places, because I mean the last session Justice Committee tackled this problem and we're not in a different situation. So I think this may be maybe to come, but it'd be good to ask for an update to see where we are with that, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Yeah, I think certainly the capacity, I think that's a good point to raise actually, is although there is an update with regard to capacity at Rossie, is that in addition to, or how does that affect the overall figures? Thank you for that. And the reform of the contractual model, I've got a note of that. Thank you. Sharon Dowie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I probably share the same concerns about capacity. And I'm also interested in what the process is when they actually reach capacity. So when there's somebody that needs to go into secure accommodation and they don't have any because they've already reached capacity, what process are they doing? Where are the kids going? And what is it we're doing. They've also said that they've highlighted a new post for a dedicated professional lead, so I'd probably like to know more information about what that is and what improvement they actually see it given to the service. And they've also highlighted a contingency plan with up to £2 million in funding. So again, will this additional funding, what's it going to achieve? Is it going to achieve extra numbers and accommodation, and how's that going to impact the service?
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. Liam Kerr.
Yeah, it's just something I'm kind of musing on based on what Rona Mackay was saying. So if the St Mary's goes back to 24 beds, which it is hoped that it will do before the summer, and the Minister said she's going to update us before the summer, so we might want to just note that to make sure that that does come through. Let's say St Mary's goes back to 24. As Rona Mackay pointed out, Rossi's added 4 contingency beds. These places need to operate at 90% plus capacity in order to break even, as I understand it. So I think we need to understand, if St Mary's goes back to 24, Rossi adds 4, what impact does that have, given the capacity that Sharon's talking about, on the 90% break-even point? There might be nothing there, but just listening to the conversation, I'm thinking, I wonder if we need to just satisfy ourselves.
Okay, thank you for that. That's fine. Yes, we've got a note of that. So we can perhaps, I think probably what my proposal would be is obviously to seek further information from the Minister. That may be forthcoming in any case, just based on the points that we've covered off. So with regard to sufficient accommodation, is what is being proposed going to be sufficient? Clarity on that capacity, form of the contractual model, what happens when capacity is reached, what's the sort of arrangement there, and as you've said, Liam Kerr, understanding the impact of restoring capacity at St Mary's, taking into account the 4 beds at Rossi, and how does that work set against the 90% capacity requirement. Rona Mackay.
Convener, there is a statement to Parliament tomorrow about security, so some of these issues may be clarified.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, thanks very much. So our members agreed that we'll obviously highlight these points, and obviously we're aware that there is a statement forthcoming later this week, during which some of these points may be covered off. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so before we move into private session, just to remind members that our next meeting will be on Wednesday the 21st of May, when our main item of business will be to hear from a public petitioner alongside other witnesses on the issue of making non-fatal strangulation a standalone criminal offence in Scotland. So thank you all, and we'll now move into private session. Thank you.